Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by our fearless leader, our managing editor, Taylor Estes. Taylor, how you doing?
Chip, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm packing my bags, getting ready to go to Kansas City for the Big
Nice.
12 basketball tournament. You're getting ready for Pro Day here. You and Jeff Howe checking to see if anyone other than Josh Thompson and Cameron Dicker can impress NFL scouts who will be in Austin for Pro Day on Thursday. And so, it's big times, big happenings. We're 2 weeks from the start of spring football.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. This is just the start of what's coming. March Madness right around the corner. I mean, it's a fun time for sure.
Yeah, let's go. Obviously, we mentioned Cameron Dicker and Josh Thompson. We talked about them a little bit going into the NFL Combine, but they both show well. Josh Thompson, corner for Texas, runs a 4.43 in the 40. And Cameron Dicker makes all 15 of his field goal attempts at the NFL Combine. So the scouts I talked to said they both helped themselves.
Yeah,
They
that's
made
huge too.
themselves some money.
Yeah, for sure. And we had Cameron Dicker on the Flagship podcast not this past Monday, the Monday before that. And he kind of talked about the possibility of getting drafted or undrafted. Like sometimes, kickers and punters will a lot of times do that. Phil Dawson was one that was a situation for. Cameron Dicker talked about him speaking with him and, also, his communication with Justin Tucker. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see kind of if there is a team out there that would take him as a kicker as a draft pick. But from everything, it sounds like Josh Thompson really could have bolstered his draft status, which is huge for him. I mean, he, as we mentioned last week, Chip, you said it best. I think that his best football is still ahead of him. And, just him having the versatility as, the experience and versatility playing pretty much every position in the secondary, that only helps him. But really his natural position is corner. And you saw him continue to grow in that later in his career at Texas. So it's going to be interesting to see, how they show out at Pro Day, if they go through all of the workouts too. I mean, 4.43 is pretty good 40 for a cornerback, So, a lot of times if people have good numbers at the combine, they may not do the same, drills or anything at Pro Day just because they're content. So it'll be interesting to see, but no doubt that they help themselves, I think, too.
Yeah, and then the Pro Day participants, Darion Dunn, Brendan Schooler, Ben Davis, Ray Thornton, Derek Kerstetter, Cade Brewer, Jacoby Jones, Denzel Okafor, Justin Motter, the snapper, and Gabriel Watson, the backup running back. So if you have forgotten who the departed seniors were from the 2021 football team, there they are. And I'll put Ben Davis down as a guy who might surprise, maybe impress some people, get a look.
I agree. I totally agree. I think, remember, I know that Ben Davis came in very hyped as a transfer, coming out of Alabama, coming to Texas. But he did have that foot/ankle injury that really sidelined him. A part of me wonders if he was ever truly able to be as good as what he could have been at Texas, just because that kind of lingered for a while. And Steve Sarkisian admitted that during the season, even. I think it was supposed to be a 6 to 8 week type of injury, I believe, at the time when it happened. But, Sark in the middle of the season did mention that it was still kind of a lingering issue. So I totally agree. I think, as long as he is healthy, I think he may be somebody to watch as somebody who could totally improve their draft stock with a good pro day showing.
Other guy I would put on that list is Darion Dunn.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he had some good moments at corner for Texas in a supporting role,
right?
And has good measurables. Obviously, found himself in a bit of a traffic jam at corner with Josh Thompson, Deshaun Jameson. But Darion Dunn is a guy, I think, and Cade Brewer. I mean, look, we've seen Andrew Beck, we've seen Jeff Swaim come out of the Texas program when no one really thought they had much of a chance to make it in the NFL at the tight end position, and they have. So Cade Brewer's healthy, which has always helped him. He's a good athlete. We'll see.
Yeah.
Um, so Taylor, obviously 2 weeks to spring football, and we've talked a lot about Isaiah Nayor, the Wyoming transfer receiver, and I wrote in the Morning Brew this week that I think Troy O'Meary is going to benefit from having Isaiah Nayor on the Texas roster because Nayor kind of looks like Troy O'Meary, both 6'3" receivers. Nayor's a little longer, a little leaner than Troy O'Meary, who's 220. But Troy O'Meary, this is a fascinating spring for him. He's still trying to get back from the second knee surgery he's had at Texas. That basically he's had 2 season-ending knee injuries at Texas to start his career, and he didn't get to show much to this coaching staff, and he actually has a new receivers coach now that he has to prove himself to with Brennan Marion, and this is like he's starting over again, and we'll see. I mean, I think it's a blessing that Texas has Isaiah Nayor coming in to be able to help fill a huge void for Texas. We talked about all the receivers who are no longer with this team, but Troy O'Meary was a guy who 2 years ago was the buzz of fall camp. He has the ACL tear, misses his freshman year, comes back. Rehab was a little, it didn't go maybe as smoothly as Troy O'Meary thought it should. I'm not sure he trusted his knee. We saw him out there with a big clunky brace on. He went to a smaller brace in fall camp, but then he injures the knee again, surgery. And so we don't know if he can regain the form that he had that freshman year in that fall camp when he was, making these crazy catches and had risen to the top of the depth chart at the X receiver position. So, but I do think that Isaiah Nayor is it's going to be good for Troy O'Meary to watch and learn from him and be pushed by him.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I think that I hate to say this, but it's kind of now or never a little bit for Troy O'Meary because, I think it was pretty obvious, Chip. Obviously, we didn't get to see all of fall camp practice, going into the 2021 season, but we did watch a decent amount of it. And you could even tell from a distance that Troy O'Meary was favoring that leg. And I think that he just truly didn't trust that he may be good to go at that point. And usually that's when people hurt themselves worse, when they start reacting or being like, kind of hesitant in their normal movements when it comes to going through drills, running routes, anything like that. And I think that's probably what happened. But he's got to step up. He's got to get healthy first, number one. And so it'll be interesting to see where he is on that spectrum, in spring practice. But the other thing is too, is he had all the hype in the world. As you mentioned, I mean, in 1 week, he rose to the top of the depth chart as a true freshman entering, his first year at Texas. He wasn't even an early enrollee or anything. I mean, he was a summer enrollee, I believe. And so he's shown that he can do it. But now it's kind of like he's quickly becoming the forgotten receiver. I mean, honestly, when there was a few weeks ago, you and I were talking about the receiver depth. And we were like, I was like, oh, I kind of forgot about Troy O'Meary. And that's not a good thing. When you're entering your third year at the college level, you don't want people to be forgetting about you when you had such an early, shining type of moment, especially in fall camp as a true freshman. So it's now or never, I think, for him, Chip. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would say yes to that, except for the fact that Texas hasn't recruited well enough at receiver yet for him to be so far down the line.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Where if you look at some guys like Darion Dunn at the cornerback position last year. It was hard for him to get on the field. If Troy O'Meary comes in and can move like he was moving as a freshman before the knee injuries, then he's going to have a chance because he's big, strong, fast. He's got good hands. I'd heard that he wasn't picking up the concepts as quickly as the coaches would have liked last year. So now he knows that. He knows that he needs to pick it up. So you'd hope that's what he's been doing in the offseason, that he sees that Josh Moore has moved on, that there's, Alvonte Woodard moved on. There's opportunity. I mean, how long have we been talking about Marcus Washington and when's he going to step up? And it's just been inconsistency from Marcus Washington. So that door is still open for Troy O'Meary, but he needs to come in this year and show what he can do. I mean, I like Kelvonte Dixon. I don't know why he isn't getting a little more love, because he's made some big third down catches. He had a 70-yard touchdown catch as a freshman in that Alamo Bowl against Colorado. He's made some plays in a game. Troy O'Meary needs to take that step first, and then show that he is indeed that tough mismatch physical receiver, kind of like Isaiah Nayor has shown already at Wyoming, 12 touchdown catches last year. I think this is a good situation, because remember when Troy O'Meary was a freshman, you had Brennan Eagles and Tariq Black ahead of him, two guys who were like not the best in terms of their work ethic and their attention to detail and film study and all that. Isaiah Nayor wants to be in the NFL. He wants to be a big time receiver. He puts in the work. He's going to be a good role model for Troy O'Meary. And as you can tell, I am all in on Isaiah Nayor. So, I start to sprinkle out my guys who I think can have an immediate impact. Nayor is definitely on that list. And this week, I'm going to add Ryan Watts to that list, Taylor, because I'm hearing, too many things about how well he's, performing and moving and the confidence that he carries. A 6'3" corner who's played at Ohio State, has made plays in games for Ohio State. So, there you go. There's a couple of nuggets.
Yeah, I was going to say, as long as you don't start the, Isaiah Nayor is a so-and-so starter kit, because I swear when Chip, that is if you go through Chip every offseason, there is one player he considers a starter kit. Not to call you out, Chip, but a lot of times it doesn't pan out. So it's almost a kiss of death. So Isaiah Nayor is a very hyped up potential, big time playmaker. No starter kits, right? We're not saying that.
Yeah, no starter kit.
Okay. Sorry, I had to rip on you a little bit.
Well, and Terrence Brooks is moving up that. He's not there yet, but man, I'm hearing good things about Terence Brooks, and both he and Ryan Watts are from Little Elm, Texas. There's got to be a nickname in there somewhere, but Taylor, they need someone to step up at corner.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, especially losing Josh Thompson. And I think that Josh Thompson's been my guy that I always talk up a little bit, because I feel like he never truly got the respect that he did deserve, especially later in his career. He showed up big time in games, last season too, but the defense and the secondary was such a mess aside from him that I feel like it totally got overshadowed. But that's a huge loss. And that's a gaping hole, I think, in the secondary, which is already kind of a question going into the season. I think safety is a little bit more of the concern, but for sure, cornerback, Chip, I totally agree. I mean, these guys that are on campus have the opportunity now to make a name for themselves and make a statement. And obviously, I think Ryan Watts may be, probably the one that's going to fill that role immediately. But Terence Brooks, as you've reported over at Horns 24/7 a number of times since the winter conditioning began, there's been nothing but really positive, glowing remarks about him, as just his work ethic, his ability, and his potential. So this is going to be fun to watch. But Texas needs one of those two, if not someone else, to really step up and fill the void that Josh Thompson is leading for sure.
And I think maybe Terence Brooks can bring to that position. You have, Jade Barron still, of course, Deshaun Jameson coming back for his COVID-19 redshirt season. And then, at safety, we've talked about that some here on the Flagship podcast, that Anthony Cook, who started off his career at Texas as a corner, moved to nickel, now getting a look at safety, which I like that. I mean, Anthony Cook, I didn't want him coming off the field last year because I felt like he was one of the more consistent performers, and they would take him off the field when they would go to their heavier look or 3 linebacker look, and there weren't enough plays being made at the safety position to take Anthony Cook off the field. They should have been, moving him around, but that's then. This is now, and so it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. And BJ Allen, the early enrollee freshman, we got to see how he can digest everything and process once he gets out on the field. But physically, he's ready. So that's big time. You want your freshmen to come in, look like they have been in a college weight room, look like they know what they're doing, and Brian Allen has that. So let's see how he can process and see if he's a playmaker, when spring ball starts.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. It's kind of interesting, Chip. Have you looked? So Texas has unveiled the spring football roster, which is actually pretty early. They usually don't put those out until right before spring practice. So I appreciated it. Gives us something to talk about a little bit, seeing these guys measurables. But have you looked at their new roster?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting if you go from number 0 through 9 to see how many new faces and new players are on this. I mean, just seeing that roster in itself right now, Chip, I was looking at it the other day. This is totally random thought, but was looking at it the other day and I was thinking, well, considering Sark has said that there's going to be essentially a roster overhaul and to get their guys in, literally there's, I think, 8 newcomers that have numbers 1 through 9 on the roster. So that's pretty telling of, kind of the, I think of just the roster turnover that Texas has entering spring, which is a good thing because they definitely need some of these guys to get their feet wet and get used to, being at Texas and getting used to the schemes at all 3 phases and learning that game. But, that it's kind of crazy just to see that. And then knowing that there's still 20 some more people probably coming, I believe, in the summer. But you're starting to see, if you go over to texassports.com and look at the Texas roster, you're starting to see the roster overhaul just literally in the first 10 numbers that are listed on the roster. And so it's kind of funny to look at that.
Yeah. And number 9 you mentioned is Jaleel Billingsley. And I thought, you always look at what these guys are weighing, and Jaleel Billingsley is listed at 214, and he's at the tight end position. So I think it's clear he is going to be in that role, that down the field stretch tight end with Juan Davis, and then you're going to have Jatavian Sanders and Gunnar Helm, who are both closer to 250,
right,
as the H-back blocking tight end. And obviously you want a guy who can do both.
Right.
And they feel like Jatavian Sanders and Gunnar Helm can both, be those multi-talented H-back blocking and catching tight ends. So that's a completely blank slate, as we know. Mentioned Cade Brewer will be at Pro Day. He's getting ready for his shot at pro football, and Jared Wiley, the 6'7", 251-pound specimen who could never stay on the field at Texas because he wasn't, he just didn't seem to love contact. He's now at TCU.
Right.
So, he's with Sonny Dykes, and we'll see what that situation brings. But tight end is another position, as you mentioned, in the, when you look at those first 9 numbers on the roster. Jaleel Billingsley, the Alabama transfer, number 9 for the Longhorns.
Yes, and Jatavian Sanders also switched numbers. He's now 0. He was number 3. Quinn Ewers took over the number 3 jersey. So anybody that thinks Jatavian Sanders, Larry Turner Gooden's then number 3 as well on the defensive side of the ball. But I know there's been some talks on the Horns 24/7 message board about Jatavian Sanders needing to move to the defensive side of the ball. Clearly, that's not going to happen because DeMarvion Overshawn's also number 0. And then he didn't, get the number 3 on the opposite side. So Jatavian Sanders is definitely, for any of the message board users that were saying he needs to move, unless something changes in spring, he's not moving. He's going to be, competing for that tight end role.
Yeah. No, and the time is now. I mean, he and Gunnar Helm are the leading, the 2 names I hear the most of the guys who can step right in and take over for Cade Brewer. You mentioned Quinn Ewers, and we'll hit this and then move on to basketball and baseball. But Quinn Ewers and Hudson Card, co-starters. I mean, they in the quarterback room, the starter sits in the front row, second teamer, second row. They both sit in the front row, and so interesting that Quinn Ewers, who's only taken 2 college snaps, both handoffs, is already seen as a co-starter in the eyes of Steve Sarkisian and this coaching staff. And Hudson Card, he's got starts under his belt. He's got lots of game experience, but Quinn Ewers already being treated like a co-starter.
Lots, as in like how many games did he play in, 5 or 6 last year? But
Right.
that just shows like the inexperience at the position. I mean, he has 2 starts under his belt. But yeah, for sure. I mean, and honestly, at this point, Chip, it should be that way, right? I mean, I think even if Casey Thompson would have stayed on campus and gone through spring, I still think, I mean, Sark was pretty clear about there's going to be a quarterback competition. Like nobody won the job last season. So it's not necessarily surprising to me, that Quinn Ewers and Hudson Carter, quote unquote co-starters right now, just because, I mean, that Sark's following through with what he said. I will say though, I've said this, I think it was last week we were talking about it, but Quinn Ewers is being promoted like heavily by Texas for not being named a starter. I mean, you could go back to the video of him and Xavier Worthy and Jake Majors and DeMarvion Overshown at the women's basketball game 2 weeks ago against, I guess it was against TCU, I believe it was. But, Quinn Ewers, among all of those players, Xavier Worthy, obviously well-known player, DeMarvion Overshown, obviously a well-known player, leader for the team. Quinn Ewers was the one speaking in the video that Texas promoted. And you're not really seeing that from Hudson Card. And I know that probably sounds silly and probably sounds like just off-season talk because we're just trying to find anything to talk about. But that's not a coincidence, I don't think. I think that's not that's an intentional thing that I think Texas is doing. And it should be a wake-up call for Hudson Card because obviously he should have a little bit of an edge knowing the playbook, knowing, what Sark demands, knowing how practices go, all of that, his experience being at Texas. And if he's not, looking at this and realizing, oh, I may be overlooked immediately before this kid ever takes a snap, goes to practice and actually holds a football, then, he's got to really wake up, I think, a little bit right now.
Yeah. All right. We will have plenty of quarterback talk coming on in the weeks to come. Again, 2
No,
weeks
not here, right? Not in
of
Texas.
spring football, March 22nd. But it is Big 12 basketball tournament week, and the Texas women are a top 10 team, and the number 3 seed. They will start on Friday. The men are the 4 seed, and they will take on TCU on Thursday in Kansas City, the early game, the 11:30 a.m. game. And they beat TCU in Fort Worth by 23. It was easily the most convincing true road game that Texas played this year. I mean, TCU is projected as an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament. So this is a team that you have to respect, and TCU led Texas by 10 in the game in Austin, and Texas came back and won it. And this to me was sort of the beginning of Texas showing that they can finish games, attack the basket, get to the free throw line, do what they got to do to win games. But this will be a good test of Texas's, where their mindset is, because they played really well in a loss at Kansas. It took them to overtime. Courtney Ramey played brilliantly in that game, scoring and defending. Ochai Abaji, probably going to be the story of the year, really, in the Big 12. Kind of came out of nowhere. The guy was just a monster for the Jayhawks, and Courtney Ramey shut him down for the second time. And guess what? If Texas beats TCU, they're probably going to play Kansas. So, in the other half of the draw, you have the two teams that swept Texas this year, Baylor and Texas Tech. So you're not quite sure what you want, because we talked about it last week. The Big 12 is going to they're going to get 6 teams in if TCU gets in. And right now they have 2 number 1 seeds in, most of the bracketology in Kansas and Baylor. So this is going to be fun. I mean, Chris Beard wants his team playing its best basketball right now. And he doesn't look at the Big 12 tournament the way Rick Barnes did, which Rick Barnes looked at the Big 12 tournament as a waste. Like, why would I put my team through, playing 3 games in 3 days and then turn right around and, start the NCAA tournament next week and have my guys be all gassed? So Chris Beard doesn't think like that. Chris Beard says, we want championships. We're going for it. And so TCU first up for the Longhorns.
So, Chip, I'm curious for your take on this. Are you, because I'll say personally, I kind of more side with Rick Barnes on that a little bit, unless you're in a situation like Texas was in, say, last year when they were on the bubble of even making the NCAA tournament, and then they ended up winning the Big 12 tournament, which got them, a place in the NCAA tournament. However, if you're a team that's already kind of a lock for the NCAA tournament, I kind of side more with Rick Barnes on that, as in, why would I really want to put my team through the same thing for baseball too? Honestly, the Big 12 baseball tournament, I feel kind of the same way, unless, you're potentially fighting for a postseason, regional type of slot or something. I think both of those tournaments are kind of irrelevant. And I'm curious what side you're on. Are you more on the Chris Beard, we're going to play every single game we can possibly play and win championships? Or are you more on the Rick Barnes, like, let's rest the guys and get them ready for the NCAA tournament?
Well, I see it both ways. And I see Chris Beard's mindset, especially with this team that he threw together out of the transfer portal. He sees every time that they take the floor as a growth experience, because, it was like speed dating. They grabbed 7, kids out of the portal, and all they had to go by was references and stats. And you don't know how they're going to take hard coaching, and it's been up and down. There's no question about it. I mean, it's Trey Mitchell, a guy who was key in Texas's win over Kansas earlier this year in Austin's no longer with the team. And I've said this on the Flagship podcast now for a couple of weeks. I'm hearing he's not coming back. So this Texas team haven't had to remake itself over the last 5 games, and they've done a good job. I mean, I think they have taken it up a step. Their intensity, their aggressiveness. Several different guys have shown they can, take over late in stretches of games, from Marcus Carr to Timmy Allen to Andrew Jones, Courtney Ramey. And they need all of those guys to be playing at their best now, because this is where it's going to get, this is where it matters.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it last week. If Chris Beard wins 1 game in the NCAA tournament this year, he's outperformed Shaka Smart in the NCAA tournament the last 6 years. So I I think in this situation, I'm going to go with Chris Beard's mindset just because they're still learning about each other and trying to get to that next level with this, boy band type of way that they created this team, throwing all these guys together and saying, "Hey, go win a national championship." And Chris Beard continues to say he thinks this team is one of those, teams that can get there. Listen, their defense is so tough. We just have to see them make shots, because they went 4 of 23 from three in the loss to Baylor here in their final game at the Irwin Center. And it was hard to watch. Every guy that they've been counting on to hit shots, from Andrew Jones, Courtney Ramey, Chase Febris, they couldn't hit anything. And when that happens with three of your best shooters all missing, you have a tough performance like that. But I see where Chris Beard's coming from in this instance.
Okay. I was curious about that. I don't think we've ever talked about that, but yeah,
Yeah,
it makes sense. It does make sense, more, I guess, experience of them playing together under their belt. But do you want to be saying that in March?
right, right.
I mean,
Well,
I wouldn't.
Chris Beard and Vic Schaefer both don't. I mean, I want to be fair to both of them because I think they do get it. They're teachers. Everyone sees them yelling and screaming at their players and thinks, "My God, these guys are fire-breathing dragons." But
That's a
they
good
do
thing
get it. They
sometimes.
do give their teams a day off,
Mhm.
after a tough long weekend, whatever, or a tough stretch where 2 games in 3 days, something like that. But both these coaches right now are pedal down. So speaking of that, the women, Rory Harmon, the freshman, named Big 12 Freshman of the Year this week, and named to the All Big 12 defensive team and the All Big 12 freshman team. And Taylor, I love the way this team is playing. They're on a roll right now, and they're going to have a tough test in the opening of this, Big 12 tournament, because they have to face Kansas State and 6'6" center Ioka Lee, who's, first team All Big 12. She's one of the toughest matchups in the conference, but Texas has handled K-State this year. And Lauren Ebo, the 6'4" senior for Texas, playing her best basketball right now. This Texas women's team is fun to watch, and you can tell by watching Vic Schaefer, listening to Vic Schaefer, he likes where his team is right now, and by getting the 3rd seed, they will be they're in the same half as Iowa State, and not in the same half as Baylor.
Mhm.
So Baylor swept them this year, and Texas swept Iowa State. So I think Texas got as good a situation as they could have wanted right now.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, there's a part of me that, like, when we talk about, like, Baylor sweeping Texas, that whole scenario, I mean, their original game, their first matchup was supposed to be in the beginning of January. It ended up being postponed, and then they play each other Friday and then the following Sunday, and it's kind of like, come on, like, yes, they did sweep them, but a part of me is like, I would love to see that rematch at some point just to see, how they truly do match up. Because I mean, right now, Texas women's are going in on what, an 8-game winning streak entering the Big 12 tournament.
Yep.
And they've just been dominating. And speaking of them, it was really cool to see that the fans that did come out and support them in the final regular season basketball game at the Irwin Center. I think that Texas announced there was like around 12,000 fans, I think they said, right? Yeah. And
Yep.
that's so
Yep.
amazing. And I believe they ended up raising a lot of money. Vic Schaefer pledged $10,000 if they got 10,000, fans in there. And then Michael Huff followed it up with his own. And then plenty of, businesses came through and also pledged it. So for the neighborhood Longhorn program. So that was cool too. But like these ladies, like, they deserve it. I mean, seriously, like, if you actually go through how dominant they have been in the last 8 games. The closest game that they have played, I'm looking right now, is 70-60. Oh, yeah, 70-60, I believe, was the Oh, no, I'm sorry. Texas Tech was the closest one on February 9th, and they won 61-56. Aside from that, it was 70-60 against Kansas. Those are the closest games they've played since February 9th when they, started this streak that they're on. So this is, as you mentioned, this is a fun team to watch. I think there's a lot of talent, and when you're talking about Vic Schaefer and Chris Beard, they're both, as you mentioned, kind of fire breathing dragons a little bit, but like these women are playing for Vic Schaefer, and Vic Schaefer, you can tell his passion for this team too. I mean, his words struck home with a lot of Texas fans, when he said that this is ridiculous, that there was only 2,500 fans out there when they're, a top 10 team. And he was right. He absolutely is right. And I know, living in Austin, there's a lot of different things you can do. It's not like how it was when he was at, Mississippi State and in Starkville. I can't imagine I've never been there, but I can't imagine there's a ton to do except support Mississippi State athletics. So it was really, I think that, he made coach hard, but you could tell that he loves these girls hard, and they love him, and they're playing for him and fighting for him. And, it's really fun to watch right now. And Texas fans, if you're not watching Texas women's basketball, you should definitely tune in, because this is a special team, I think, that we're seeing come together here at the right time too.
Yeah, and they're fun to watch because they press, they run, they play an entertaining brand of basketball. They get up and down the floor, and they make they put pressure on the other team. They turn turnovers into points. That's their go-to, and so check them out. And they got 3 seniors: Joanne Allen Taylor, Audrey Warren, and Lauren Ebo, and they all have COVID-19 redshirt seasons remaining if it works out for them and for Vic Schaefer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to keep an eye on, because Joanne Allen Taylor has been a big time force for this team the last 2 years. Same with Audrey Warren and Lauren Ebo. If you'd have told me 2 months ago, any chance Lauren Ebo's back for another year, I'd have said no, but she's bought into what Vic is selling. And now she's, playing her best basketball. So keep an eye on that. All right, Taylor, let's touch on baseball before we get to love it or leave it. And baseball still number 1. They go to Houston. They rake and pound on number 17 Tennessee, and they pound on number 7 LSU. And then they suffer their first loss of the season on Sunday against UCLA. They lose 5-1. Tanner Witt was a late scratch, the starting pitcher. He had some muscle soreness above the elbow in his throwing arm, so it was precautionary. But Lucas Gordon ends up getting the start. The bats kind of fall silent, and they lose that game, but maintain their number 1 ranking. And this week take on Texas State Tuesday and Wednesday, and then go to South Carolina. South Carolina, a team who was a ranked baseball team last year, lost 4 big time position players, and so started the season unranked. And South Carolina just got swept by Clemson last weekend. So this South Carolina team, it looks like it's trying to figure things out from a pitching standpoint. They have an ace in Will Sanders, who is going to, that'll be a great matchup against Pete Hanson. And then the story for South Carolina is this freshman, Michael Braswell, who he's an infielder. He's a pitcher. He's their best hitter. And this guy is fun to watch. I mean, he is, he's just kind of blowing people away because he can do it all. And as a freshman, you don't always see that, a guy who will play shortstop one game and pitch the next, but and he's their best hitter. So kind of like Brooks Kieschnick back in the day for the Texas Longhorns, but it should be fun to see how Texas bounces back from that loss to UCLA.
Yeah, and I think that if you're talking about Texas right now, I mean, obviously Tanner Witt, as you mentioned, was a late scratch on Sunday, but the pitching continues to just be absolutely dominant. Now, I will say, unfortunately, Pete Hanson finally did give up some earned runs. So his perfect streak is not there still, but Tristan Stevens is. I mean, he still has yet to give up an earned run in, 3 Saturday starts. And, he's pitched 19 innings. And then you have Pete Hanson, he's had 3 starts. He has a .53 ERA currently in 17 innings pitched. You hope that Tanner Witt comes through and this is not a lingering type of issue that he is dealing with. But as long as that pitching staff, Chip, continues the way it's going, especially the Friday, Saturday night guys, like this is, you're watching a very, very special team. I'll say that. And I would take, I mean, you saw what they did to Tennessee and LSU. I mean, those are not some scrub teams at all. Those are ranked teams. And a lot of people, I think, prior to the what was it called? The Shriners Hospitals for Children College Classic. I think that's what it was called. I may be butchering it, but people are like, well, Texas hasn't really been tested yet too much, and it's like, well, there's your test, and they dominated. They won 7-2 against the number 17 ranked team in Tennessee. They won 6-1 against LSU. I mean, say what you will about them not being tested. Like, this is a team I think that I would probably take in almost every single game that they play, especially a Friday, Saturday game.
Yeah, and that Tennessee game was something. I mean, if you watched Tennessee freshman pitcher Chase Burns, he was as good as Hanson, and I think he ended up going 5 innings. Hanson went 6 innings, and Texas couldn't hit Burns. It was only when they went to their bullpen that Texas, started knocking the cover off the ball, and the ERA just ballooned for Tennessee once Chase Burns left the game. But you're right. I mean, you look at the Texas pitching, and you just have so much confidence because you're going to the bullpen. You're getting Travis Staley. You're going and getting Andre Duplantier. You're getting Luke Harrison. You're getting, Jared Southard, and then Aaron Nixon. Aaron Nixon has had some tough situations where guys have been on base. A couple instances where he walked them full and then, got back-to-back strikeouts to get out of the inning. There's a toughness that we're seeing from Aaron Nixon now as a sophomore that just makes you feel good, because there were some moments last year as a freshman where it got away from him, and you want to see him be able to gather himself in those tough situations where he's going to have to come in and maybe inherit a base runner or two and get Texas out of the jam. And he's done it so far. So I think Texas, should handle business this week, but let's see how they bounce back.
Yeah. Aaron Nixon has 2 saves, I think, so far on the year. Is that what?
I think that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, pitching is so crucial in baseball. And I mentioned this last week. I mean, if you want to look at it being crucial, look at the Texas Rangers. I mean, when Nolan Ryan was involved in the organization, like, he put an emphasis on their pitching staff. And that's when the Texas Rangers played for a World Series. They were 1 out away from winning it. Sorry, Rangers fans, if I brought up a bad memory. I know that's a sore subject, but still, and it's like the minute that, they got Nolan Ryan out of the equation and just relied on the front office people, the suits, to make those calls, they've been terrible. And it's like, look at what's changed. It's the pitching. The pitching is so crucial in baseball. And, my brother was a pitcher. At Pepperdine, he was their Sunday starter at Pepperdine under Andy Lopez when he used to be the coach there. He only played 1 year because he was a transfer. He actually had a weird kind of situation with, my brother passed away when he was going into college. So he actually went to junior college and redshirted so he could be around our family. Stuck around, like, he was drafted out of high school, out of junior college twice, and then went to Pepperdine for 1 year. And, his pitching came through so big in one season. He went from an unknown name to a first-round draft pick. And, it just goes to show, like, how not only how crucial it can be for a team, but how crucial it can be for a player to really step up and be those guys. And you're seeing that, especially in the starters and Pete Hanson, Tristan Stevens, Tanner Wood obviously has played well. And if you're a Texas fan, you want to see him back out there, but they have a lot of depth at pitcher, and they have a big, a stacked bullpen, as you had mentioned. Aaron Nixon, 2 saves, still yet to give up an earned run. I mean, that's pretty big. So I think that this is a really good situation for Texas, and you want to see, hopefully the offense can kind of pick up if there is a situation where they need them to. But as of right now, there really hasn't been too many situations where the offense is needing to come through and pull this team out of a slump. I guess against UCLA a little bit, but that was a kind of unique situation with Tanner Witt being a late scratch right before the game there.
Yeah, and you got to love what Murphy Staley's doing at the DH position. He's the best hitter on the team right now, 409. And, he batted 500 over the weekend. So you're happy with that because you didn't know, like we've talked about, how do you replace Zach Zubia, that offense, Cam Williams, Mike Antico? Well, you're doing it with Doug Hodo kind of taking over where Mike Antico left off. Murphy Staley's hitting, and Ivan Melendez, what can you say? They're calling him the Hispanic Titanic because he's just obliterating the baseball. He's got 3 home runs, but it feels like those are the longest home runs we've seen all year. So, all right.
His home run in that,
Minute it disappeared.
Yeah, it was like no one saw where the ball landed.
Where'd it go?
Yeah, I thought it was funny. Just a random thought to Marvin Overshawn. I saw his tweet over the weekend when Texas baseball tweeted out Ivan Melendez home run there, and he goes, "I think this ball just busted my window. ... And I'm in Austin." Yeah. And it's like, yeah, where'd that ball go? No one knows. I mean, that was insane.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, let's grab some Love It or Leave It.
All right, Chip, before we get to Love It or Leave It, we're going to take a very quick break, but stick around. We have some more football, basketball, and March Madness talk coming up in Love It or Leave It, so stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on here. In case you missed Monday's episode of the Flagship podcast, definitely tune in. We had longtime UT color analyst for Texas athletics, Roger Wallace, on. He was great in kind of talking about both Texas, or not both, but Texas, basketball, baseball, and some spring football. So definitely tune into that if you have not had a chance to. But with that said, Chip, you ready for some Love It or Leave It?
Absolutely. And I second everybody tuning in to what Roger Wallace has to say about Texas, football, basketball, baseball. Great conversation.
Yeah, for sure. All right. My first one for you, Chip, is Love It or Leave It. Ryan Watts or Terrence Brooks will be a starting cornerback for Texas in 2022.
I'm going to love this. I think it's Ryan Watts right now. And, from what I'm hearing, the guy has come in, moves incredibly well for a guy who's 6'3", isn't afraid to get up on people at the line, and has the confidence of a guy who's played at Ohio State. And then you look at Terrence Brooks, who's sort of like Ryan's little brother. They're both from Little Elm. Terrence Brooks was committed to Ohio State. Now they're both at Texas. A windfall for Texas at the cornerback position, in my opinion. But yeah, people are talking about Ryan Watts like a freak. And so I'm going to love this, Taylor. I think, as I said a little earlier in the show, Ryan Watts has joined Isaiah Nayor as an immediate impact newcomer that I'm willing to put my name on. Whatever I got to do, I'll wear that. I love this. How about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna love this too. And I also, Chip, personally, I'm a big fan of big cornerbacks. I think that you go back to even, when Charlie Strong was the coach, and there was, brought in Holton Hill, Chris Boyd, Devontae Davis. I mean, those guys, especially I think in the Big 12 when there's so much talent at wide receiver, you need a guy that's not only going to be able to keep up with the receivers in the conference from a speed standpoint, but you also need guys that can break up the ball. And like having a corner that is 6'3" and I'm trying to see 209 pounds and rots. I mean, that's something Texas didn't really have last year. They didn't really have, I think, in 2020. I mean, it's been a while since Texas has had those big corners. I know a lot of times they're hard to come by, and a lot of times the taller they get, the slower they are, so they are more looked at as more of a safety nickel type of player. But I think if you can find a corner that has the height and the speed that Ryan Walks can bring to the table, I'm always probably 9 times out of 10 at least going to chalk them up as somebody who's going to be a starter or a difference maker at that position. So, from everything they're hearing in winter conditioning and just, looking at the position as a whole, I think there's no doubt that Ryan Watts probably is the second starter at cornerback aside on the other side of Deshaun Jameson. But, Terrence Brooks has a chance to really secure some playing time too. So yeah, I'm gonna love it and say that Texas at that second corner position is in a good situation with both of those guys who I really do think could step up and clearly, obviously, if they're willing to move Keaton Crawford to safety, you know, who's a corner, I think that it goes to show what the staff is feeling and their confidence level in that other starting corner position. So I'm going to agree and love that too.
All right. Numero dos.
Second one is love it or leave it. Right now, Chris Beard's team feels like it will win one game in the NCAA tournament before bowing out.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope they win one game, at least one game. Look, they're projected as a 5 seed right now in most bracketology, which means they'll be favored to win that 5-12 game, and then they'll take on most likely a 4 seed. And you know what? I'm gonna leave this because I think this team could get to the Sweet 16. So I'm going to give Chris Beard. He's got a 10-4 record in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, he reached the national championship game in 2019, and I just think these guys are playing good enough defense that they'll find scoring. And when you have to prepare for Chris Beard's team on short notice, which will be the case if they win their first round game, they'll turn around 2 days later and play someone. That team will have, that they won't have enough time to prepare for Texas defensively. I think this Texas team can get to the Sweet 16, and then everybody will look at this season and say, wow, they'll just look at it completely differently than they do right now when they think back on Texas getting swept by Texas Tech and Baylor. So I'm going to leave this. Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, oh man. So okay, this is where I'm a little torn. If Texas is a 5 seed, I know I've said this before, but that 5 and 12 matchup is usually one
Right.
that I'm like, oh, there's an upset brewing. And since I've seen so many Texas basketball upsets in the NCAA tournament, a part of me is like, oh gosh, like if they're a 5 seed, it's going to be hard for me to feel very confident about them. But I'm going to take the seeding out of it for now. And I think that Texas, obviously has a good chance to break the negative streak of not, winning an NCAA tournament game since Lord knows how long ago, since when Rick Barnes was, even in Rick Barnes last year, they didn't win, right? They lost in the first round, I think. I don't even know how long. I'm not going to rehash history and make Texas fans angry. So I'm going to love this, actually. I'm going to say that they're going to win one game and then bow out. I feel like it's hard for me to give too much, hype going into the NCAA tournament because I feel like every year that Texas in the last, half of a decade or longer has actually made it, it's not been that way. So yeah, I think I'm gonna have to love it and say 1 and done for Texas basketball.
Okay. All right. Number 3.
Number 3, love it or leave it. Rory Harmon will end up being for Texas women's basketball what TJ Ford was for Texas men's basketball.
You know what? I'm feeling it right now. Roy Harmon named Big 12 Freshman of the Year this week. I'm gonna love this. In part because Vic Schaefer knows how to get his teams deep in the tournament. I mean, he got to the Elite Eight last year with 6 players who he'd never coached before. And it was amazing. They did it with, I mean, they MacGyvered their way to the Elite Eight, but they shut down the number 1 offensive team last year in Maryland to get to the Elite Eight. They got smoked by South Carolina in the Elite Eight. But again, this was a team that was getting it done with bailing wire. So, now he's got an elite point guard in Rory Harmon. And I do see some similarities, between her and TJ Ford, the point guard who took Texas to the Final Four in 2003. Now, TJ was an assist machine. Rory is, she's averaging almost 5 assists per game, leads the Big 12 in steals, season still going on. And in her second game at Texas, she scored a team high 21 points in an upset of defending national champion Stanford in Palo Alto. So she's fearless. And I just think she's just scratching the surface. I just think that she has a chance with the talent that Vic Schaefer's recruiting here, that I think she goes to a Final Four before it's all said and done. So I'm going to love this. Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'm going to love it too. I think that, when you see a player come in and be as consistently, like perform as consistently well as she has, and then really shine as a freshman, I think you have to expect a lot more from her. I mean, she's just getting used to Vic Schaefer too, as he's getting used to her as a point guard. And I think that, I mean, I have a question for you. When you say she can bring Texas to a Final Four, is that this year, or do you think it's down the road?
It may not be this year.
Okay.
I think there's some tough matchups out there. Obviously, Baylor's size is tough for anyone, but it may be 2 years from now, or or maybe even but when she's a senior. But I think she helps lead Texas to a Final Four before she leaves.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I do agree. I think that this is a really
But they're the 7th ranked team right now, Taylor. So who knows? I mean,
it could happen.
Could
8-game winning streak going in too. Yeah. I mean, I think overall, when you see a freshman come in and make the impact that she has, you automatically are going to like raise your expectations for her. And I do think that she's playing really, really well as a very young and green player at the college level. And especially with Vic Schaefer, he's known to develop players and really get the most out of his teams. And if he can get the most out of Rory Harmon, then yeah, I totally see this being similar to a TJ Ford for what he was to Texas men's basketball. So I'm going to agree with you, and I'm going to love it too.
All right, there you have it, kids. Go check out the Flagship Podcast interview with Roger Wallace, the longtime color analyst on Longhorns athletic broadcasts, and 27 years at KXAN.
That's wild.
Come on, guys.
Wild. He's been there for only, well, I was going to say like almost as long as I've been alive, but not really. I'm giving myself a little bit too much. I'm a little older than 27, but that's crazy. You don't hear that very often nowadays, people being the same spot, especially in media. Like, come on.
Way to go, Roger.
There you go, Roger.
Kudos. And thanks to everybody for listening to this week's episode of the Flagship Podcast. We're inching our way toward spring football. And of course, March Madness is here. And we'll be back to recap it all next week. And for Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Until then, stay safe and keep the faith.